It's late afternoon, about 5 o'clock, so I thought I'd come down to Watermans Bay and see whether I can capture an image with a sunset. Sunset is due in about an hour, about 6 o'clock. Once I capture the image, I thought I'd then show you how I approach post-processing to enhance the image. Alright, so I've found myself a position down here at the base of these steps, which is excellent. Just want to quickly talk you through my composition. It's a fairly simple composition. Down at the bottom here there's a series of rocks, and it's got these really bright green moss growing over the top of them, which is going to look lovely in a shot. So I've got kind of a forest of them in front of me. Alright, so on the front of the camera I've got my polarizer that's just cutting through the glare on the surface of the water, and also on the wet rocks and the moss. And then I've got a 0.9 hard grad that is just taking off the highlights in the sky, that enables me to increase the exposure and make sure I get as much detail in the rocks in the foreground, which is going to be really, really important for a balanced image. So my camera settings that I'm using, I'm on ISO 100. My f-stop is currently at 9. So as the sun sets, the light varies, and I vary my shutter speed depending on that to make sure that I have a balanced image. The image that I finally select, I won't really know until I get home and I can have a look at them in Lightroom and decide which one is the best. Now the sun has set, what I'll continue doing as the light decreases is I'll continue increasing the shutter speed for a longer and longer exposure. And the longer my exposure is, the softer that water, the more I'll smooth the water out for a different type of image. So I'm noticing that every now and then I get a wave that comes crashing over those rocks and disturbs the water just in that pool in the front there. So as I increase my shutter speed, that will smoothen out that water. It'll smoothen out the water way off in the distance over there for a nice soft image. So hopefully what you can pick up from the back panel there is that I've got quite a significant difference in light in different parts of the image, and you may be able to pick up from the histogram just here. While I've got quite a lot of shadows, I've also got some highlights that I'm nearly clipping, so that's what I'm having to be really, really careful with. On the front of the camera, I've actually now got two graduated filters, both hard. One of them is 0.9 and the other one's 0.8. So I've doubled those graduated filters up to take the light out of the sky. So from that image there, this is from the video camera, you can see the difference between the foreground and the light in the sky. If I bring you across to the back panel here, just wait for it to focus, you are able to see that I've got a lot more detail in the rocks in the foreground there, and even though the video is not really picking it up particularly well, I've got far more detail in the sky as well. That's because I've doubled up those graduated filters. However, I've still got to be careful of clipping my highlights, and that's why I've got my histogram there on the back panel. I use that to just to check my shadows and my highlights as I'm changing the shutter speed all the time as the light varies. My f-stop is 9 and my shutter speed is 10 seconds, which is quite long, but that'll really smoothen that water out, particularly in the background there. So I'll just take that shot. I'll just pop that up there again. It's come up nicely. Once the sun's gone down, I'll hang around here and I'll keep on taking photos with longer and longer and longer shutter speeds. What I find is the colour in the water and the colour in the sky, even the clouds or even behind the clouds, will continue to change 10 minutes, 20 minutes, even 30 minutes after the sun has actually gone down. Is the best time to be picking up some really interesting colours in your images. So I certainly don't start packing up once the sun has gone down. Well, eventually I did pack up, and I'm now back in the study, and I'm going to show you how I edited this image. Before I start though, I do want to just say that I certainly don't consider myself an expert in Lightroom. There are plenty of tutorials on the net that will show you all the ins and outs of Lightroom, which are really fantastic resources. But I have had a few requests about showing how I edit an image, so I thought I'd just, as something different, show you how I approach editing, and perhaps you'll pick up a couple of tips. So this image, straight out of the camera, looked like this. You can see that it's quite underexposed, and there's two reasons for that. One is generally I do underexpose my images. I shoot in RAW. In fact, my camera is set up to shoot in JPEG and RAW, but I always edit the RAW format. I underexpose because I can always get the detail out of those dark areas. But in this particular case, it's underexposed because it's a sunset, and if I didn't underexpose, I would have all of this light area of the sky and the light area around the sun itself would be blown out. You can see from my histogram, the top right hand corner here, I've got lots of darks in the image, and then I'm almost clipping. I'm very close to clipping. In fact, I've clipping some of the reds in the image. So that's what we've got to deal with. So what's the first thing I do? I like to come down here to the lens correction and remove chromatic aberration, and also enable the profile correction. That just straightens up the horizon, and while we're on that, I then go back up to the crop tool, and while I don't necessarily crop it straight away, I do try and just make that horizon absolutely horizontal. Excellent. So next, let's have a look at the basic adjustments. So I use the auto function within Lightroom. I think it's a far better way it's a far better starting point for your image. So I'll click on auto there for the white balance, and from there I'll then make an adjustment. I'll just make that a little bit warmer. I like it around about there. I think is good. I'll leave the tint for now. Again, with the tone, I'll use the auto function. Hit that, it'll work out its adjustments, and again, I think that's a far better starting point, and then I can adjust from there. I'll leave the exposure where it is. I may come back to that later. Contrast looks pretty good. Might bring the shadows up a little bit, closer to something like 40. Excellent. Whites are good for now, and the blacks I'll start to just bring down a little bit. And about there is good. So next is clarity. You've got to be fairly careful with the clarity. I don't like overusing that. I limit myself to around about 15 to 20. Around about there looks pretty good to me. Around about 12. Vibrance, I'll use a little bit more. That looks around about it there, maybe just a little overdone, so maybe around about 30 is good. I'll leave saturation. I don't touch saturation there, because what I like to do is come down to this panel here where I've got saturation, and I can specify exactly which colors I want to boost, rather than come up here and saturate the entire image. So I'll just quickly go through and adjust these. A little technique that I use is I move it from one side to the other and work out which part of the image it's going to affect. And then once I've done that, I'll conservatively add the saturation there. I won't overdo it. That looks pretty good like that. Green could quite easily be overdone in this image, so I've got to be very careful with that. Maybe just +4. Aqua, of course, is going to affect the colour in the water, so I'll bring that up maybe to 20, and the blue as well. It's looking pretty good, around about 18 to 20. A little bit of purple and probably magenta in the sky. Yep, there it is there. So again, just making sure that I don't oversaturate the image. Next up is detail, the sharpness. So I'll go back to where I focused the image, which was around about this rock here. You'll notice that the Lightroom adds a little bit of sharpening automatically. So you've got to be careful not to overdo that as well, because as you sharpen, you start to potentially introduce noise into your image. 50 to 60, maybe 55 is around about my limit. Again, I don't like overdoing it, so I'll leave it there. That noise that you potentially can introduce to your image is going to be around the highlights. It's also going to be around the shadows as well, and one way to avoid that is using this mask on the Option key on the keyboard and holding that down and then moving that mask to the side. You can see that those dark areas are going to block out the sharpening effect that you're introducing. So we don't want that in the clouds. We just want to maybe around the edges of the clouds near the horizon, and those rocks really is where we want it. So yep, around about 70 looks pretty good to me. We've done lens correction, so now while we're there, what I might do is just remove the vignetting, or remove the vignetting correction, because I do like that vignetting effect on my images. In fact, I'll add more in a sec. Just before I do, right down the bottom here of this effects panel is dehaze, which I find quite useful, but again, something else that could typically be overused if you're not careful. So if I bring it to the right, it'll darken the image. If I slide it to the left, it'll lighten the image. Something like that looks pretty good, just a +10. No more than that. Maybe I'll just drop it down to about 8. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. As I said before, it's darkened the image, so I might come back up here to exposure and just add a little bit more exposure to my image, which is looking pretty good. And then I'll come back down here to the effects, and I will add some more vignetting. It kind of focuses the viewer on what I want them to focus on, which is generally the middle of the image. So I'll bring that up to around about 25. Leave it there for now. I also like to bring in the midpoint, which just brings in that effect further into the center, and then I increase the feathering the other way, which just eases the effect a little bit So just to make it a little bit more subtle, I suppose. I don't want an obvious vignetting, but just something subtle is good. I think what I'll do is I'll try and remove some of that blue from the sky. So to do that, I'll use one of these masks. I can bring that down. That will automatically straighten up if I hold the shift key. Bring that down to around about there. And then I'll bring the temperature up and just add a little bit more warmth. But what I'm doing is I'm pretty much keeping it to the clouds around about there. It's looking pretty good now. 20. Don't think I really need to touch the tint, but I could if I wanted to. But again, I don't want to introduce too much colour. That may be looking just a little bit pink for my liking. Might just bring that back down, maybe to there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. But I am, by the looks of it, clipping my highlights. And if I hover over this highlight clicking in indicator, you can see in red, that's exactly what I'm doing around the sunset. So I need to do something about that. Well, one thing I can do is I can grab my brush tool. I can come down here to the effects and choose a darken, which just effectively reduces the exposure. I might bring that down to say 0.4. That brush is a pretty good size, and then what I'll do is I'll just add a little bit of darkness, and you can see that I'm just reducing that red. So there's less area now that I'm clipping. And I might just bring that through to there, which is good. All that area can be darkened just a tad. So I'm still clipping a little bit, so we still need to work on it. Overall, if I grab the whites and just bring the whites down, that's quite good, around about there. And that reduces the red completely, which means that I'm not clipping those highlights, which is excellent. The other thing that I can see now is I've got this little bit of fishing line that's been stuck on the rock. We need to do something about that. So I'll use my spot removal tool and just quickly remove it. And that's looking pretty good. The last thing, or just before the last thing I do, I just might bring a little bit more vignetting into that around the edges. Probably a little bit too much. Yep, 35 is looking pretty good. Around about there. I can keep on working on it, keep on tweaking it. I know that I do have a couple of areas here which are a little bit dark, so there's two ways in which I can go about that. One is grabbing a mask here, inverting it, and going like this, pulling it up that way, and then just over that area, grabbing the shadows and increasing the shadows there, so you can see how I'm bringing in a little bit more detail in those darker areas. So that's looking pretty good around about there. Another thing that I can do is I can grab the brush tool and go down to a dodge, which is lightening, effectively adding a little bit of exposure, which is not a bad idea. In fact, I might just pump that up a little bit more. And again, I grab my brush and I can just brush in those areas here. As you can see, it's just lightening, bringing up a few of those darker areas there, around here. And I can keep on working on that for as long as I want, but it's just highlighting some of these rocks and darker areas in between the rocks that just gives me a more balanced image. So I can keep working like that, but you get the idea. So the final thing I'll do, now that I'm happy with the image, is I'll go up to the crop tool and I will crop the image. I'll choose 16:9. I'll just bring that down so the horizon's on that top third. I'm happy with that. So I'll click done. Now that was reasonably fast, but pretty close to what I did beforehand. The image before looked like, or the image that was in the video looked like that, and the image that I've just edited for you looks like that. So it's pretty close. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So if this is your first time to my channel and you enjoyed the video, subscribe so you're notified when I upload my next video. And if you want to help me with the videos that I'm uploading, then feel free to share this video or a link to my other videos with your friends on through social media. Thanks very much for watching.